I was about 16 years old by 1986 when this war broke out. And I've lived through the war partly when I was in the village between 1986 and 87, after which I lived mostly in the town, and for 5 more years from 1989 to 1993, I lived in Bunyoro. My experience through 1986 to 1987 is that things have been tough. We grew up as children with the bliss of what home can give, plenty of food stuff, enjoying the company of livestock. In the early days when we acted as shepherd boys, and then during the school term we would spend our time in school. In the dry season you spend your days in the rivers swimming and fishing and hunting birds and the rest of it. But soon in 1986 when the war broke out, that became a dream that would never come true until today. The life has been changed, and I think changed for good, because the homes that once we enjoyed is now destroyed over the war. Things were very bad by June 1986 because communication was difficult. Those who were in the village could not go to the town, and those in the town could not come to the village, without the risk of being treated as a spy by either side, the government forces or the rebels, which then were called the Uganda People Democratic Army. But soon, in 1987, by April, Joseph Kony had to take over, and things turned out for the worst, because Joseph Kony wanted a young man, and myself and my age mates were abducted. I was lucky to be a bit of a difficult boy, and I ran away and survived and escaped to the town. That was early May 1987. Those of my friends who were not so lucky as to escape, at least about 75% of them were abducted, and most of them spent their times in the bush. Those who escaped and came back home had no way to get back to school. And I should think that my age group have only about 15% who are able to have access to education, at least some reasonable education, and are useful today in the society. The best of my generations are gone with the war, either dead or illiterate, or they might be maimed from the war, or some of them might be spending the rest of their life as soldiers. Having been displaced, like many other families in the town, life was hard. For a time in 1988, we lived on government rations by the means of rehabilitation, but that was often not enough. It was easy to witness families, women and children fighting for the relief items, which were often quite small for them to survive on. Many a family which never used to do casual labor learned to do casual labor as a means of survival. But somehow, with the grace of God, many families survive. Sooner or later, development aid agencies brought in relief items, and that was a better hope for the families. But though that hope was coming, on the one hand, the rebel movement, the LRA, were persistently destroying those who they thought were not on their sides. The government were increasingly becoming impatient with people who live in the rural areas, because oftentimes they would be found to be collaborators with the rebels. And so the homes were evacuated, people were put into camps. By 1993, most of the homes had been destroyed, and by 1998, literally, there were no villages around in northern Uganda. So with that, more humanitarian problems arose. Since there was no communication, it was quite easy for soldiers on either sides, whether rebels or government sides, to commit atrocities on the civilians, who were often unarmed victims of the conflict. Either seen to be supporting the rebels or seen to be supporting the government forces, many people, young and old, lost their lives. Many lost their homes, lost everything, the belongings that they have. We did not know what poverty was, but today we know. We did not know what begging is, but today there are many beggars around. Even old men would never beg in our communities. Children were never in the streets in our communities, but today that is a common phenomenon in the communities, and that's the effect of the war. One sad side is that it seems to be a local war, but with a lot of international faces. Because on the one side, the Arab world would want to see Kony as an ally to help them spread Islam in East Africa. On the other side, those who sell arms from Europe, from Russia and other countries would find the war as a very good place for marketing their arms. And so the war has been fueled, not only with local resources and human resources, but also with support from other people in the international world, both in Europe and Arabia and elsewhere. And that's the reason why I believe that the war has been quite serious. And that's why it has taken quite long. After 20 years, we seem to see a semblance of peace, but in dilemma because we are not quite sure how successful it is going to be. People think that when peace comes back, then justice would be done to those who perpetrated crime during the war and to those who are hurting people in the present community